Put your hands together. Danny, you've been so good to us. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Blue Magazine, Jen, Kathy, everybody here has been so great to us. Where's Katrina? Is Katrina still here? I have to respectfully disagree with one thing. She says we don't have to suffer. And there was never a more untrue statement than to say we don't have to suffer. Suffering hurts. It's a visceral word. And that's why we've named our podcast the Suffering Podcast. Because we need to hear these stories. And now you're going to hear another happy story. That's what tonight's about, right? Happy stories? Well, it turns out that they are happy. Because without suffering, you would never be the person that you are. Brad would never be Brad. Sheriff Clark would never be Sheriff Clark. Danny would never be Danny. Unless you've gone through certain things that people can identify with. My personal thing, on July 10th, 2013, I was in a critical incident. I'm a retired officer from Roseland, New Jersey. I can remember certain things about that night. Certain things that I don't want to remember. I remember the bullet whizzing past my ear, missing my head by 1/4 of an inch. I remember hitting the ground. I remember the route that I took to get there. But I never thought that it would affect me the way that it affected me. They told me, hey, go home. I had some glass in my arm. Go home. Take a little break. You're going to have a couple days off. Come back Monday. Oh, cool. You had a long weekend, right? Sounds good. But what I wasn't ready for was uncontrollable feelings, uncontrollable urges, anger, depression, darkness in such a short amount of time. And that's why I say we all need to suffer. The problem with suffering is it's human nature to run away from suffering. It's never human nature to run towards it. But the difference is if you run towards that suffering, the duration of that pain will be so much shorter. It's like a prairie fire. Okay, does anybody know what you do in a prairie fire? I have all this useless knowledge in my head. And this is one of them, because we don't have any prairie fires in New Jersey. In a prairie fire, they teach you not to run away from it, because that's how it's going to get you. And that's suffering. Okay? As you run away from it, it's getting bigger and bigger and more out of control. Some people run away from their suffering through alcohol. Some run away through drugs. But on this particular prairie fire, if you run away from it, it's going to get you, it's going to kill you. If you run straight towards that prairie fire, which is counterintuitive to your basic human instincts, you get through the other end with minimal damage, and you'll more than likely survive. Well, it's the same thing with suffering. After my incident, I chose to run away. I chose to cope with these uncontrollable feelings in some very unhealthy manners, some bad behaviors. I would drink, and all that suffering was doing was getting bigger and bigger and bigger until I became what I felt to be a burden to my wife. My 3-year-old son, I put him through horrible things. My 7-month-old son didn't even know me. All he knew was this monster. I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I see pictures flying back to the incident. Or if I did sleep, I'd wake up in so much sweat that I thought I'd piss myself. So what do? It's time. I'm ready. It's time for me to shuffle off this mortal coil. I go in my office, and I have for my off duty a Smith & Wesson 38 caliber cheap special nickel plated. It's a very beautiful gun. It weighs 19.5 ounces. I look down at this gun, and I'm holding it in my hand, and this thing might as well have weighed 50 pounds. I recently just qualified, so I didn't get a chance to clean the gun, but it was still shiny, and the light's bouncing off of it. I'm holding it in my hand, and I'm thinking, you know what? It's time. I'm looking for a reason to not do what I'm about to do. And everybody here knows this feeling, or knows somebody who has gone through this feeling. You're in a realm of darkness. You're ready to go. You're not thinking clearly. You're not thinking that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. All you think about is you're a burden to everybody around you. And this world's better off without me. Well, that night, 2 o'clock in the morning, on my knees in my office, crying. I got this lead weight in my hand. I put the gun in my mouth. I can still, to this day, 8 years later, taste the gunpowder on the end of that barrel. Feel the metal up against my teeth. I close my eyes and I'm looking for something to tell me not to do this, but nothing's coming. I cock back the hammer to make it single action. Anybody knows anything about double action guns, is once you cock back that hammer, it's a really super light trigger pull. All you gotta do is touch that trigger. I got my finger on that trigger and it's got little ridges on it. I can still feel them. And the gun's in my mouth. I'm ready to go. It's time. I close my eyes. And it hits me like a lightning bolt. And I was very fortunate because this is something that most people don't get a chance to have a realization. That moment of realization, a moment of clarity, as addicts will call it. And the first words that are out of my mouth are, my kids, my children. My 3-year-old, he's barely gonna remember me. My 7-month-old, he'll never remember me. And all I'm gonna do is leave this suffering for my wife. She's gonna be the one coming down and finding the body, the blood everywhere. She's gonna have to deal with the bank accounts and making sure there's enough money to pay the mortgage. But I'm not thinking about this stuff at the time. Because anybody who is going through thoughts like this never wants to push the suffering onto somebody else, ever. But they think the world's better off without them. Now you tell me, if my wife can't pay my mortgage, how's the world better off without me? If your kids grow up without a father and don't know how to throw a baseball, how's the world better off without me? It's the most untrue statement in the world. So I don't do it that day. There was other incidents. There was lots of other unhealthy behaviors. I continue therapy, going down the road to retirement, realizing that it's not getting better. I end up going to group therapy with other like-minded individuals because I realized something. As time went on, police officers see approximately, throughout a 20-year career, approximately 800 critical or traumatic incidents. You know how much the average person sees, the average citizen sees in their lifetime? Maybe 1 or 2. Traumatic incidents. So our brains get broken. And every time we see a new traumatic incident, then we put on another piece of armor. And then we see another one, we put on another piece of armor. Until what happens? We're so laden with armor that we can't stand up. We're heavy. We're going through what I like to call compassion fatigue. Our hearts hurt, our brains hurt. So after I was about to take my own life, I started talking about it. And it was the first time. It took me a while to tell my therapist what I did, because I was afraid, they're gonna put me in the loony bin, put me in the booby hatch, put me in Bellevue. I start telling people, and I tell it the first time, and guess what? I picture like samurai armor, all the lobster armor, you know what I'm talking about. And I feel a piece come off, and I feel a little bit lighter. So wow. So this whole time I'm trying to run away from these bad feelings when I should be running towards it, because every time I run towards it, another piece of armor comes off. Another piece of armor comes off. And every time I tell the story and help out somebody else, the armor comes off. Well, in this group therapy, I see people coming in and out. And I see the look in their eye, and I say, my friend, you are about to go on a wild ride. And there's nothing I can say or do to tell you any different. However, what I can do is say, I'm here. And in walks this gentleman right here, Mike Falaise. I had known Mike, not well, but known him for 25 years. I see him walk in. I see the look in his eyes, because I've been there. I have that perspective. Suffering gives you perspective. I have that perspective. I said, my friend, you're about to go on a wild ride. And I'm going to give it over to Mike Falaise.
Thank you. I'm not going to be too long. If anybody's listened to the podcast, I'm more of the Ed McMahon and Johnny Carson over here. He does all the talking. So I'll let him do the talking. Like you said, my name's Mike Felice. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Lyndhurst Police Department. 7 years and 2 days ago today, I was involved in a fatal shooting. It was the most traumatic experience of my life. We all know that feeling of you feel like you're a burden to everybody. I felt like I was a burden. I said I'm too much of a baby to kill myself, but the thought did enter my mind. Plenty of times I thought, how could I do it? Am I going to hang myself? The Attorney General had my gun still, so I couldn't shoot myself, so that was out the window. Am I going to jump off a bridge? Am I going to do something? Then I started going to group therapy where I got reintroduced to Kevin and the great Dr. Eugene Stefanelli, who was here earlier today. I always thought I was a Joe Macho cop and I could handle anything that comes my way. This is something that was, the PTSD and the pain that I was feeling was something well beyond me. So anybody going through anything like that, the only thing I could tell you, 2 things. Don't be afraid to talk to someone, and don't be afraid to cry. Get those emotions out. You keep bottling up those emotions, it's gonna eat at you. We call it filling the glass. You can only fill up that glass so much before it starts to spill over. To me, getting it out in the group therapy lessons and going to see different therapists, talking about it, it becomes a burden lifted off your shoulders. It's a terrible feeling, but it gets better. I just want to thank everybody for coming out, for listening to us, and if you get a chance, just listen to our Suffering podcast.
So I wanted Mike to tell a story for a very valuable reason. If you have listened to our show, Mike and I are brutal on each other. Because as police officers, that's how we deal with the pain. That's how we deal with the suffering. We delve into dark humor. If outsiders, if regular citizens were to listen to us, they'd call the cops on us. They'd call the prosecutor's office and say, these guys are really, really messed up. But that's how we deal with the pain. So this group therapy session, you start looking forward to it. And hey, listen, I kind of feel normal with these guys. Time moves on. And we're able to help so many different people through group therapy. This is a show. This is a podcast. This is something that we need to get out. We need to start teaching people how to run towards the suffering. And we've had some dark, dark stories on our show, which have given me so much perspective on my life. And they made it through. And then once they make it through, it's like they're shedding the armor. The best win we had was a guy has lost his son to suicide after being bullied. He had about a 4-hour drive home after recording our show. He calls us up the next day and he says, that was the most peaceful ride I had in my entire life. This was, I think this was 5-6 years after something. 6 years, that's the most peaceful ride that I had. So I want to challenge everybody in this room who's been touched one way or another by blue suicide. When you feel that hurt, when you feel that pain, don't run away from it. Don't medicate it. Don't drown it with alcohol. Run towards it. You may just be surprised. You got to take a chance. And if you run towards that suffering, you're going to make it through to the other side. Now you're going to be able to help people because you're going to have the perspective. Thank you all very much for listening. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you want to take a listen.